The morning sun cast long shadows through the skeletal remains of downtown Los Angeles, its rays filtering through the broken windows of abandoned skyscrapers like golden fingers, reaching for the dead city below. Jake Martinez adjusted the weathered canvas awning of his food cart, the metal frame creaking in the perpetual wind that swept through the urban wasteland. 3 years had passed since the invasion ended, since the alien ships had departed as mysteriously as they'd arrived, leaving behind a world forever changed. Jake wiped his hands on his apron, a faded blue thing that had seen better days. Much like everything else in his life, at 32, he'd survived the invasion, the chaos that followed, and the slow, grinding years of rebuilding that came after. His dark hair, longer now than he'd ever worn it, caught the breeze as he surveyed his domain, a converted pushcart fitted with a portable fusion cooker, storage compartments, and a small prep area. It wasn't much, but it was his. You're certifiably insane, you know that. Jake turned to see old Pete approaching, his weathered face creased with concern. The elderly scavenger had been one of the few humans Jake had encountered in the ruins, a grizzled survivor who knew every dangerous corner of the dead city. "So you keep telling me," Jake replied, firing up the cooker. The familiar hum of the fusion cell brought him comfort, a sound that meant warmth, food, and normalcy in a world that had forgotten what normal meant. But crazy might be exactly what this place needs. Pete shook his head, his gray beard bristling. Opening a food cart in the middle of nowhere is one thing. Opening it in the neutral zone is another. You know what comes through here, Jake? The ones who stayed behind. Jake did know. The neutral zone had become an unofficial DMZ between the human settlements and the alien enclaves that had formed after the war. It was a place where the desperate and the displaced gathered, where the rules of the old world no longer applied. Most humans avoided it entirely, but Jake had chosen it deliberately. "Everyone's got to eat, Pete," Jake said, seasoning a pan with oil extracted from the hardy plants that had learned to grow in the contaminated soil. "Human, alien, doesn't matter. Hunger is hunger." "That's what I'm afraid of," Pete muttered. But he didn't leave. Instead, he settled onto a makeshift stool Jake had fashioned from scrap metal, his eyes scanning the empty streets. "Just promise me you'll be careful. The ones who stayed, they're not like the ones who left. They're desperate, and desperate beings do desperate things." Jake nodded, understanding the older man's concern. The aliens who had remained on Earth after the invasion were refugees of a sort, cut off from their own kind, struggling to survive in a world that had been designed to kill them. The air was wrong, the food was wrong. Even the light from the sun was different from what they'd known. Many had died in those first years, unable to adapt. Those who survived were changed by it. The morning wore on with no customers, just the two men and the endless wind. Jake used the time to prep his ingredients, such as they were: protein bars broken down and reformed, vegetables grown in hydroponic gardens hidden in the ruins, spices he'd traded for with precious medical supplies. It wasn't gourmet cuisine, but it was real food, prepared with care and seasoned with something that had become rarer than gold in the wasteland: hope. It was past noon when she appeared. Jake noticed her first as a shadow at the edge of his vision, a figure moving with careful steps through the debris-strewn street. She was tall, willowy, with skin the color of a clear summer sky and markings that seemed to shift and shimmer like liquid silver across her face and arms. Her hair was white as snow, cropped short in a practical style, and her clothes were simple but well-maintained, a fitted jacket over practical pants, both in shades of gray that helped her blend with the ruins. She approached the cart cautiously, her large eyes a deeper blue than her skin fixed on Jake with an intensity that made his breath catch. There was intelligence there, and wariness, but also something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or hope. "Is this food?" she asked, her voice carrying a musical quality that made even the simple words sound like a song. Her accent was unfamiliar, the way she shaped the human words suggesting a mouth and throat not quite designed for them. "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied, offering her his most genuine smile. "What can I get you?" She blinked, those remarkable eyes widening slightly. "You would serve me?" The question hit Jake like a physical blow. In it, he heard months or years of rejection, of doors slammed in her face, of being treated as less than human. His jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "I serve anyone who's hungry," he said simply. "What sounds good to you?" She stared at him for a long moment, and Jake found himself studying her face in return. Her features were humanoid, but delicate, with high cheekbones and a small, precise mouth. The silver markings on her skin seemed to pulse faintly, and he wondered if they indicated emotion or simply her species' equivalent of a heartbeat. "I have no currency," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I have this." She reached into her jacket and withdrew a small, cylindrical object that hummed with internal energy. "It is a power cell, still functional. Worth perhaps 1 meal." Jake examined the cell, recognizing it immediately as military grade, probably salvaged from alien technology. It was worth far more than a single meal, enough to power his cart for a week. He looked up at her, noting the careful way she held herself, the subtle signs of malnutrition in her too thin frame. "This is worth more than 1 meal," he said, and watched her face fall. "This is worth several meals. How about I make you something now, and you can come back when you're hungry again?" The transformation in her expression was remarkable. The wariness melted away, replaced by something that might have been wonder. "You would do this." "I would do this," Jake confirmed, already reaching for his ingredients. "What's your name?" "Nira," she said, and the way she said it made it sound like music. "And you are?" "Jake Martinez," he replied, firing up the cooker. "Welcome to Jake's kitchen. It's not much, but it's honest food, made with care." As he worked, Jake was aware of her watching his every move. He prepared a simple but hearty stew, using techniques he'd learned during his years as a line cook before the invasion. The protein was synthetic, but he'd learned to season it in ways that made it taste almost like real meat. The vegetables were fresh from his hidden garden, and the broth was rich with nutrients that both human and alien biologies could process. "The smell," Nira said softly, and Jake looked up to see her eyes closed. Her head tilted back slightly. "It reminds me of home, of my mother's cooking." Before, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Jake understood. Everyone had lost something in the war. Everyone had a before that they mourned. "Where is home?" he asked gently. "Stirring the stew. Far from here," she replied, opening her eyes. "Further than you could imagine. My people, we were explorers, scientists. We came to your world to study, to learn. We never meant for the war to happen." Jake nodded, ladling the stew into a bowl he'd carved from reclaimed wood. "Wars rarely happen the way anyone means. Them too," he said, offering her the bowl along with a spoon. "But they end, and then we have to figure out how to live with what's left." Nira accepted the bowl with both hands, a gesture that seemed formal, ritualistic. She took a tentative sip, then another, and Jake watched her face transform as the flavors hit her tongue. It was like watching the sun rise, the way joy spread across her features. "This is extraordinary," she breathed. "How do you know how to prepare food that my people can eat?" Jake shrugged, beginning to clean his cooking area. "I studied. After the war, I figured if I was going to cook for whoever showed up, I'd better learn what they could and couldn't eat. Turns out, most sentient species have more in common than you'd think." Old Pete, who had been silent through the entire exchange, stood up slowly. "I'll leave you to your work, Jake," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Just remember what I said about being careful." After Pete left, Jake found himself alone with Nira, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, and Jake found himself studying her again. There was something about her presence that calmed him, made the ruins seem less desolate. "Why do you do this?" she asked eventually, setting down her empty bowl. "Your people, most of them fear us, hate us. Why risk serving us?" Jake considered the question, looking out at the empty streets where two civilizations had once tried to destroy each other. "Because fear and hate are what got us here in the first place," he said finally. "Someone has to try something different." Nira stood, reaching for the power cell, but Jake waved her away. "Keep it," he said. "Consider it a down payment on future meals. You trust me to return. I trust you to be hungry again, Jake replied, with a smile, and when you are, you'll know where to find me. She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her entire face. Thank you, Jake Martinez, for the food and for treating me like a person. You are a person, Jake said simply. Different from me, maybe, but still a person. That's all that matters, as Nira walked away, disappearing into the maze of ruins as silently as she'd arrived. Jake felt something shift inside him. For the first time since he'd set up his cart, he felt like he was doing more than just surviving. He was building something, creating something, making a difference. The afternoon brought no other customers, but Jake didn't mind. He'd made a connection, established a foothold in the wasteland that was about more than just food. As the sun began to set, painting the ruined city in shades of orange and gold, he began to pack up his cart, already planning tomorrow's menu. In the distance, he could see movement among the ruins, figures watching from the shadows, drawn perhaps by the smell of cooking food or the sight of Nira's peaceful departure. Tomorrow, he thought, there might be others. Tomorrow, his little corner of the wasteland might become a little less lonely. The last kitchen was open for business. The second day brought rain, a steady drizzle that turned the ash-covered streets into gray rivers of sludge. Jake had rigged a larger tarp over his cart, creating a small shelter that kept both his equipment and his customers dry. He'd learned to adapt to the weather patterns of the new world, where acid rain was common and clean water was precious. He was prepping vegetables when he heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. Jake looked up, expecting to see Nira returning for another meal, but instead found himself face to face with a man he hadn't seen in over a year. Finn O'Connor, Jake said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. What brings you to my corner of paradise? Finn was a compact man with sandy hair and the kind of pale skin that burned easily in the harsh, post-war sunlight. He'd been Jake's sous chef at Romano's, the upscale restaurant where they'd both worked before the invasion. Now he wore the practical clothes of a settlement dweller, reinforced denim, a weathered leather jacket, and boots that had seen too many miles. Heard rumors about a crazy cook setting up shop in the neutral zone, Finn said, shaking rain from his jacket. Had to see if it was true. He looked around at the desolate surroundings, his expression skeptical. Jake, what the hell are you doing out here? Making a living, Jake replied, continuing his prep work. Same as always, this isn't making a living. This is making a target of yourself. Finn stepped closer, lowering his voice. You know what happened to the Henderson family last month? Raiders hit their farm, killed everyone, and they were inside the settlement perimeter. Jake's hands stilled on his knife. He'd heard about the Hendersons, a family of farmers who'd been trying to restart agriculture in the wasteland. Their deaths had shaken the entire survivor community. That was different, Jake said quietly. They had resources, land, livestock. I've got a cart and some cooking equipment. You've got something more dangerous than land, Finn countered. You've got a reputation. Word is spreading about the human who feeds aliens. There are people who don't like that idea. Before Jake could respond, movement caught his eye. A figure was approaching through the rain, tall and graceful despite the treacherous footing. As she drew closer, Jake felt his breath catch. She was stunning in a way that transcended species barriers. Her skin was the color of burnished gold, seeming to glow with its own inner light even in the gray morning. Her hair was long and flowing, a deep red that reminded Jake of autumn leaves, and it moved around her face like liquid fire. She wore a fitted bodysuit that managed to be both practical and elegant, designed to shed water while accentuating her tall, athletic frame. Jake, Finn whispered, his voice tight with warning. That's one of them. I can see that, Jake replied, but his tone held no fear. Instead, he found himself fascinated by the way she moved, like a dancer navigating the rubble-strewn street. Her eyes, when she looked at him, were the color of amber, warm and intelligent. She stopped about 10 feet from the cart, studying Jake with the same intensity he was studying her. Unlike Nira's tentative approach, this one radiated confidence, even a hint of challenge. You are the one they call the food giver, she said, her voice carrying a rich, melodious quality that made even the simple words sound like poetry. Her accent was different from Nira's, more clipped, suggesting a different species or perhaps a different region of origin. "I'm Jake," he replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "And you are Zara," she said, but didn't approach any closer. "I have heard interesting things about you, Jake the food giver. All good, I hope," Jake said with a smile, trying to ease the tension he could feel radiating from Finn behind him. Zara tilted her head, studying him with those remarkable amber eyes. "That remains to be seen. You serve my people, they say. But why? What do you gain from this?" It was a more direct question than Nira had asked, and Jake sensed that Zara was testing him somehow. "I gain customers," he said simply. "I gain the satisfaction of feeding people who are hungry. I gain the hope that maybe we can all figure out how to live together on this world." "Pretty words," Zara said, but there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "But words are easy, actions are harder." "Then let me show you," Jake said, reaching for his ingredients. "What would you like to eat?" For the first time, Zara's composed expression flickered. I have nothing to trade. I came only to observe. Observation is free," Jake said, already beginning to cook. "But so is lunch if you're hungry." As Jake worked, he was aware of both Zara and Finn watching him with different kinds of intensity. Finn's concern was palpable, while Zara's attention felt like a physical weight. He prepared a dish he'd been experimenting with, a fusion of human and alien cooking techniques that created something entirely new. "Jake," Finn said quietly, "maybe we should talk privately." "Whatever you want to say, you can say it here," Jake replied, not looking up from his cooking. "I don't keep secrets from my customers." Finn's frustration was evident, but he pressed on. "Fine, there's talk in the settlements. About you, about what you're doing out here. Some people think you're a hero, feeding the starving aliens. Others think you're a collaborator, helping the enemy. The war is over, Finn," Jake said, plating his creation with the same care he'd once used in five-star restaurants. "There is no enemy anymore. There are just people trying to survive. Tell that to the families who lost everything," Finn shot back. "Tell that to the kids who grew up in bunkers, afraid to go outside because of the sky ships." Jake finally looked up, his eyes hard. "I'll tell them the same thing I tell everyone. Holding on to hate won't bring back the dead. It'll just create more graves." He offered the plate to Zara, who accepted it with a grace that spoke of nobility or high station. She took a bite, and Jake watched her eyes widen slightly. "This is unexpected," she said, taking another bite. "You have combined techniques from my world with ingredients from yours. How did you know to do this?" "I didn't," Jake admitted. "I just tried things until something worked." Cooking is about experimentation, about finding harmony between different elements. Zara ate in silence for several minutes, and Jake found himself studying her face, looking for some sign of her thoughts. She was beautiful, certainly, but there was something more in intelligence, a depth that intrigued him. "You are not what I expected," she said finally, setting down the empty plate. "The stories about you, they painted you as either a saint or a fool." "What do you think I am?" Jake asked. Zara smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "I think you are dangerous," she said, "but not in the way most of your people fear. You are dangerous because you make us hope." The rain had stopped while they talked, and weak sunlight was beginning to filter through the clouds. Jake became aware of other figures in the street, keeping their distance, but clearly watching the interaction between him and Zara. "Your people?" Jake asked, nodding toward the observers. "Some," Zara replied. "Others are simply curious. Word of your kindness has spread through the refugee camps. Many want to see for themselves if the stories are true. Tell them they're welcome here," Jake said. "All of them." Zara stood, smoothing down her bodysuit. "I will consider your offer," she said formally. "But understand, Jake the food giver, that kindness is not always rewarded with kindness. There are those among both our peoples who profit from division, who see peace as a threat to their power." "Are you warning me?" Jake asked. "I am telling you to be careful," Zara replied. "You have started something here, something that could grow into something wonderful or something terrible. The choice may not be yours to make." As Zara walked away, her red hair catching the weak sunlight like flame. Jake felt the weight of her words. Beside him, Finn was shaking his head. "She's right, you know," Finn said quietly. "You're playing with forces you don't understand. There are people in the settlements who would burn this place down just to make a point." "Then they'd better bring marshmallows," Jake replied. But his tone was more serious than his words suggested. "Because I'm not backing down. Not when I'm finally doing something that matters." The afternoon brought more customers, a steady trickle of aliens who approached with the same cautious hope. Jake had seen a Nira. Each one was different, some reptilian, others more humanoid, a few that defied easy categorization. But they all shared the same hunger, the same desperate gratitude for simple kindness. Jake served them all, learning their names, their stories, their preferences. He began to build a mental catalog of what each species could and couldn't eat, what spices they enjoyed, what textures they preferred. It was like learning a new language, one written in flavors and aromas instead of words. As the sun began to set, painting the ruins in shades of gold and crimson, Jake realized that something had fundamentally changed. What had started as a simple food cart was becoming something more, a gathering place, a bridge between worlds, a symbol of what might be possible if people chose hope over fear. But with that realization came another. Zara had been right. He was dangerous, not because of what he was doing, but because of what he represented. And in the wasteland, dangerous things had a way of drawing dangerous attention. In the shadows between the ruined buildings, Jake caught glimpses of movement figures, watching from concealment, evaluating, planning. Not all of them were aliens seeking a meal. The third week brought Jake his first real test. He'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of his new life, mornings spent preparing fresh ingredients from his hidden hydroponic gardens, afternoons serving a growing clientele of alien refugees, evenings planning menus and reinforcing his makeshift security measures. The steady stream of customers had forced him to expand his operation, adding a second cooking surface and more storage space. Nira had become a regular, arriving each morning with salvaged components or useful information about safe routes through the ruins. Her shy demeanor had gradually given way to something warmer, and Jake found himself looking forward to their conversations about everything, from pre-war literature to the complex social structures of her homeworld. Zara remained more enigmatic, appearing every few days to observe more than eat, though she always accepted whatever Jake offered. Her presence commanded attention from the other customers, who treated her with a deference that suggested high status among the refugee community. Jake had learned not to push for personal details, sensing that trust would have to be earned. Slowly, it was during the lunch rush of fate customers could be called a rush that the Raven squad made. Their entrance, Jake noticed them first as shadows moving with military precision through the ruins, their black, tactical gear marking them as one of the human raider groups that had emerged in the power vacuum after the war. Unlike the desperate scavengers who occasionally passed through the neutral zone, these men moved with purpose and discipline. "Jake," Nira whispered, her voice tight with fear. She was standing at his counter with 3 other aliens, an elderly reptilian male, a young female with iridescent scales, and someone from a species Jake hadn't encountered before, whose skin seemed to shift colors based on mood or emotion. "I see them," Jake replied quietly, his hands continuing their steady work preparing a meal for the color-shifting alien. "Everyone stay calm. Keep eating. Don't give them a reason to escalate." The leader of the squad was a tall, lean man with the kind of pale scars that spoke of serious combat experience. His dark hair was cropped short in military fashion, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who'd learned to see other beings as obstacles rather than people. He approached Jake's cart with the swagger of someone accustomed to intimidating others. Well, the leader said, his voice carrying easily across the small space. "If it isn't the famous alien lover we've been hearing about." Jake continued cooking, not looking up from his work. "Name's Jake. Welcome to my establishment. What can I get you?" The leader laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "What you can get me's an explanation. See, me and my boys here, we've been hearing some disturbing rumors. Stories about a human who's been feeding the enemy, helping them get stronger. planning their next attack on decent folk. The only thing I'm planning is tomorrow's menu, Jake replied calmly, finally looking up to meet the man's gaze. And last I checked, feeding hungry people wasn't a crime. Feeding humans isn't a crime, one of the other raiders interjected. A stocky man with arms covered in tattoos depicting various military units. Feeding the bastards who killed our families, destroyed our cities, that's collaboration. Jake felt the tension ratchet up another notch as his alien customers shifted nervously. Nira's blue skin had taken on a paler shade, and the color shifting. Alien had turned a deep, alarming shade of red. The war's over, Jake said, his voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. These people are refugees, not soldiers. They're just trying to survive, same as everyone else. People, the leader's voice rose, drawing the attention of figures watching from the ruins. You call these things people, after what they did to us? Before Jake could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade. They are people, and this is neutral ground. Everyone turned to see a figure emerging from behind a collapsed wall. She was unlike any alien Jake had encountered, tall and powerful, with skin the color of emeralds and what appeared to be natural armor plating along her arms and shoulders. Her hair was black and cropped short, practical rather than decorative, and her eyes were the pale green of sea glass. She moved with the fluid grace of a predator, every step radiating controlled violence. Kes, Nira breathed, relief evident in her voice. The newcomer Kes positioned herself between the raiders and Jake's customers, her stance making it clear that she was prepared for violence. You will leave, now. The raider leader's hand drifted toward the weapon at his hip. And who's going to make us, lizard? Kes smiled, revealing teeth that were definitely not human. I am. What happened next occurred with startling speed. The leader went for his gun, but Kes was already moving. She covered the distance between them into swift strides, her hand closing around his wrist before the weapon cleared its holster. Jake heard bone crack, followed by a scream of pain as the gun clattered to the ground. The other raiders reacted quickly, drawing their own weapons, but they hesitated. Their leader was now effectively a human shield, his arm twisted at an unnatural angle while Kes held him with casual strength. Your friend will live, Kes said conversationally, addressing the other raiders. His arm will heal, but if you point those weapons at civilians again, I will not be so gentle. You're making a mistake, the tattooed raider said, his gun trained on Kes despite the obvious risk to his leader. There are more of us. We'll be back. Perhaps. Kes agreed, releasing the leader who stumbled backward, cradling his broken arm. But today, you leave. The raiders retreated, but not before the leader fixed Jake with a glare full of promised violence. This isn't over, alien lover. We know where to find you. After they were gone, the silence stretched uncomfortably until Jake broke it by returning to his cooking as if nothing had happened. Anyone else hungry? He asked, his voice only slightly shaky. Kes approached the counter, her pale green eyes studying Jake with obvious curiosity. You were not afraid, she observed. I was terrified, Jake admitted, ladling soup into a bowl. But showing fear to people like that only makes them bolder. Can I offer you something to eat? It's the least I can do after you probably saved all our lives. Kes accepted the bowl with surprising delicacy for someone who'd just broken a man's arm with casual ease. You should not be here, she said after tasting the soup. This place will become a battlefield. Then I'll learn to cook in a battlefield, Jake replied. I'm not abandoning my customers because some thugs with guns don't like who I serve. Your loyalty is admirable, Kes said, but misplaced. These refugees cannot protect you from what is coming. Maybe not, Jake agreed, beginning to clean his equipment. But that doesn't change what's right. Kes studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both, Jake said with a rueful smile. Story of my life. As the day wore on, word of the confrontation spread through the refugee community. More aliens began arriving, not just for food, but to see the human who had stood his ground against armed raiders. Jake found himself becoming something he'd never intended to be, a symbol. Nira lingered after the other customers had left, helping him secure his equipment for the night. Kes was right. You know, she said quietly. About the danger, the Raven Squad won't forget what happened here. I know, Jake replied, checking the power levels on his portable fusion generator. But I can't live my life based on what violent people might do. If I did that, I'd never leave my shelter. There are other places you could set up your cart, Nira suggested. Safer places. Jake paused in his work, looking out at the ruins that had become his domain. This is where people need me, he said finally. The safe places already have food, already have hope. This place has nothing but hunger and fear. If I can change that, even a little bit, then it's worth the risk. Nira stepped closer, her cool fingers touching his arm. Then you will not face that risk alone, she said softly. I will help you. We all will. Jake looked down at her, seeing something new in her blue eyes, not just gratitude or friendship, but something deeper. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility, until the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn. Zara emerged from the shadows, her golden skin seeming to glow in the twilight. The raider camp is 12 kilometers south, she reported without preamble. 43 members, well armed, with vehicles. They are planning to return tomorrow night with more force. How do you know this? Jake asked. Zara's amber eyes glittered with dangerous light. Because I paid them a visit. They will think twice before threatening you again. What did you do? Nira demanded, alarm in her voice. Nothing permanent, Zara replied. But their leader will remember the conversation for some time. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. The situation was escalating beyond his control, turning his simple food cart into the center of a conflict he'd never wanted. But as he looked at Nira's concerned face and Zara's protective stance, he realized something important. He was no longer alone in this fight. Tomorrow, he said finally, we'll be ready for them. But tonight, we plan, all of us together, as the three of them huddled around his cart, mapping out defensive strategies and emergency protocols. Jake couldn't help but notice the way both women looked at him with admiration. The fourth week brought unexpected revelations that would change everything Jake thought. He knew about his chosen location. It started with Vera, a mysterious alien who appeared at his cart just as the morning mist was lifting from the ruins. Unlike his other customers, she didn't approach tentatively or with the desperate hunger he'd grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, she moved with purpose, her violet skin seeming to shimmer in the pale sunlight. Vera was striking in an otherworldly way, tall and lithe, with features that were almost human, but subtly wrong in ways that made Jake's eyes want to linger. Her hair was silver white and hung in intricate braids adorned with small metal ornaments that chimed softly when she moved. Most unsettling were her eyes, which appeared solid black until the light hit them just right, revealing depths that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. Jake Martinez, she said, her voice carrying an accent unlike any he'd heard from his other alien customers. I have been watching you. Most people start with hello, Jake replied, continuing his morning prep work. After the confrontation with the Raven Squad 3 days ago, he'd grown more cautious about strangers, but something about Vera's demeanor suggested she wasn't a threat, at least not an immediate one. Hello, Vera said with what might have been amusement. Now that we have observed the proper courtesies, we must speak of dangerous things. Jake set down his knife, giving her his full attention. What kind of dangerous things? Vera glanced around, ensuring they weren't being observed, then leaned closer to the counter. You have chosen your location poorly, Jake Martinez, or perhaps too well, depending on your true intentions. I'm not sure I follow. This hill. Vera gestured to the ground beneath his cart. It is not what it appears to be. Beneath your feet lies something that many would kill for, something that explains why the Raven Squad was so interested in driving you away. Before Jake could respond, familiar voices approached. Nira and Zara were arriving for their usual morning visit, but they stopped short when they saw Vera. The tension between the three alien women was immediately palpable. Vera, Zara said, her voice carefully neutral. I did not expect to see you in the neutral zone. Circumstances change, Vera replied coolly, as do allegiances. Nira moved closer to Jake's side, her blue skin pale with what looked like fear. She is Syndicate, she whispered urgently. Corporate intelligence. Jake, you should not trust her. Former syndicate. Vera corrected with a slight smile. I have recently found my employment. Terminated. Jake looked between the three women, sensing undercurrents of history and conflict he didn't understand. Ladies, perhaps we could all take a step back. And there's no time for diplomacy, Vera interrupted. Jake Martinez, in approximately 6 hours. A corporate extraction team will arrive to claim what lies beneath your cart. They believe you are either complicit in hiding it or ignorant of its existence. Either way, they intend to remove you permanently. What's beneath my cart? Jake demanded, his patience finally wearing thin. Vera's black eyes seemed to swirl with hidden depths. A pre-war research facility. Specifically, the laboratory where Dr. Helena Vasquez was developing prototype terraforming technology before the invasion began. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Dr. Vasquez had been famous, a brilliant xenobiologist whose work on atmospheric processors had been meant to help humans colonize hostile worlds. Her disappearance during the early days of the invasion had been one of the war's great mysteries. That's impossible, Jake said. The military searched for her lab for years. If it was here, they would have found it. The military was looking in the wrong places, Vera replied. They assumed she would have built it in a secure government facility. They never considered that she might have chosen to hide it in plain sight, beneath what was then a small hillside park in downtown Los Angeles. Zara stepped forward, her amber eyes fixed on Vera, with obvious suspicion. Why tell us this? What do you gain? Survival, Vera said simply. The syndicate has decided that the technology is worth more than my continued employment. They plan to eliminate all witnesses to its recovery, including their former intelligence operative. She gestured to herself with bitter humor. Jake's mind raced as he processed the implications. The terraforming technology, what exactly does it do? In simple terms, it can transform the atmosphere of an entire planet to make it habitable for any species, Vera explained. The applications are limitless. Hostile worlds could be made garden paradises. Refugee populations could be relocated to planets previously thought uninhabitable. Or, Nira said quietly, existing populations could be eliminated by making their worlds uninhabitable to them but perfect for invaders. The weight of the revelation settled over Jake like a heavy blanket. He'd chosen this location randomly, drawn by its central position and elevated view of the surrounding area. The idea that he'd been unknowingly cooking meals above one of the most valuable pieces of technology in the galaxy was almost too much to process. How do we get into this lab? Jake asked, surprising himself with the question. We? Vera raised an eyebrow. Jake Martinez, you are a cook, not a soldier or a scientist. This is not your fight. Like hell it isn't, Jake shot back, his voice harder than any of them had heard before. I've spent weeks building something here. I've made friends, created a community, given people hope. If there's technology down there that could help refugees find new homes, instead of scraping for survival in ruins, then it damn well is my fight. Zara moved closer, her golden skin seeming to radiate heat. It will be dangerous. The syndicate does not negotiate. Neither do I, Jake replied, meeting her gaze. Not when it comes to protecting the people I care about. The moment stretched. Between them, charged with meaning neither quite dared to voice. Jake was acutely aware of how close Zara stood. The way her amber eyes seemed to see straight through him. Beside them, Nira watched with an expression that mixed admiration with something that might have been jealousy. The entrance is hidden, Vera said, breaking the spell. Dr. Vasquez was paranoid about security, but I have the access codes part of my severance package. You might say. They spent the next hour planning, using Jake's card as cover while Vera sketched out the layout of the facility from memory. The entrance was concealed beneath what appeared to be a natural rock formation, about 50 meters from Jake's position. The lab itself was built into the hillside, its corridors extending deep underground. The main laboratory is here, Vera pointed to her crude map. That's where the terraforming prototypes are stored. But there are other sections, living quarters, data storage, even a small hydroponic garden that might still be functional. A garden, Jake's interest sharpened. That could explain why this area has better soil than the surrounding ruins. Underground irrigation, mineral supplements seeping up through the rock. Your vegetables, Nira said suddenly, they taste different. From others I have eaten since coming to Earth. Richer, more complex. Because I've been growing them in Dr. Vasquez's experimental soil, Jake realized. No wonder they seemed to work for multiple species. She was designing them to be universally nutritious. As they talked, more figures began appearing around the cart. Kes emerged from the ruins where she'd been keeping watch, her warrior's instincts alert to the tension in the air. Other regular customers followed the elderly reptilian male Jake had come to know as Grant, the young scaled female called Tish, and several others who had become part of his extended family. Something is wrong, Kes observed, her pale green eyes scanning each face. There is danger coming. Jake looked around at the group that had gathered aliens from half a dozen different species, refugees who had found in his simple food cart something they'd lost in the war, a sense of belonging, of community, of hope. The thought of the syndicate destroying what they'd built here, scattering these people back to their desperate isolation, filled him with a cold fury. There's danger coming, he agreed, but we're going to face it together, all of us. He quickly explained the situation, watching as understanding and determination replaced fear on their faces. These people had already lost everything once. They weren't about to lose it again without a fight. The terraforming technology, Grant said in his gravelly voice, it could give us new worlds, places where we could rebuild, create homes instead of hiding in ruins. It could, Vera agreed. But first, we must keep it out of syndicate hands. They would use it as a weapon, not a tool of peace. As the group dispersed to prepare for the coming confrontation, Jake found himself alone with his three most frequent customers, Nira, Zara, and now Vera, three remarkable women from three different worlds, each offering him something unique. Nira's gentle strength and unwavering loyalty, Zara's fierce protectiveness and noble bearing, Vera's sharp intelligence and mysterious past. Jake, Nira said softly, her blue eyes troubled. Whatever happens today, I want you to know that meeting. You changed my life before. I was merely surviving. You gave me a reason to hope again. For me as well, Zara added, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. I have spent years believing that humans and my people could never truly understand each other. You proved me wrong.